Last year, the Capital One Orange Bowl hosted one of the college football playoff semifinals and matched up then number 2 Michigan versus number 3 Georgia. Georgia, of course, winning that game in dominating fashion to my own disgust by a score of 34-11. This year's Orange Bowl is the first of the New Year's Six bowl games, and it includes two teams that were playoff hopefuls, and that if things went differently, these teams could have replaced Ohio State or potentially TCU in that third and fourth spot, respectively. Tennessee's playoff run was still alive after they lost to Georgia by a score of 27-13. If Tennessee were to win out, and I will defend this opinion, they would have made the playoff likely over Ohio State, given the fact that they lost on the road and earlier in the season compared to Ohio State losing later in the season and at home. But South Carolina had other plans, and on the road on that fateful day, Tennessee lost to South Carolina in their second to last regular season game by a score of 63-38. Hendon Hooker got injured in that game, and we will never sadly see him play in a Tennessee Volunteer uniform. There's an argument that he should have went to New York if he was healthy. That just strengthens the case. Some thought he was snubbed from the Heisman Award ceremony as C.J. Stroud, Stetson Bennett, and many other quarterbacks with better supporting casts and not as impressive stats went over him. But Tennessee has a chance to achieve their best season in over a decade, get 11 wins, and depending on how the playoff shakes out, finish in the top 5 or top 4, depending on how Alabama and the playoff teams play in their respective bowl/tournament games. Tennessee in this game is an underdog, and that's because wide receivers Cedric Tillman and Jaylin Hyatt have opted out, and quarterback Hendon Hooker is obviously injured. For Clemson, the story is a little different. Clemson was viewed much more favorably entering the season, which in retrospect totally doesn't make sense because their offense and defense were both above average at best and trash at the worst. Clemson is ranked number 7 currently. They're 11-2 in the nation. They're undefeated in the ACC, but they lost half of their non-conference games, losing to South Carolina and Notre Dame, respectively. You might as well call the Orange Bowl the two teams that lost to South Carolina Bowl. It's a pretty bad and bland name, but it's the truth. South Carolina effectively ended both of these teams' seasons. South Carolina is Clemson's final game of the year every time. It's a rivalry game, and South Carolina won by a point in a 31-30 score, in which Clemson was up by double digits originally, but Shane Beamer, Spencer Rattler, and the Gamecocks clawed their way back. DJ Uiagalelei played terribly that game. He was benched against UNC in the ACC title game in favor of Cade Klubnik, and he announced his transfer out shortly afterward. Clemson also lost earlier in the year to Notre Dame, and even though many, and myself included, thought that game was the only loss that Clemson should have had to tell the committee this team's not playoff ready, South Carolina thankfully put an extra bullet, in Clemson's playoff hopes to assure that they were dead. Tennessee and Clemson will face off against each other a few days before the new year, and two backup quarterbacks, at least in perspective of the amount of starts they got in the regular season, will be taking on each other. Both of these teams have their strengths, their weaknesses. It's a new up-and-coming young head coach in Josh Heupel against somewhat now of an old guard, stubborn Dabo Swinney, who there's an argument and a thought by many that he might be past his prime years. The Tigers have not been to the national title game since 2019, and their quarterback play and offensive play since really the 2020 season has been terrible. In 2021 and in 2022, this offense has looked downtrodden, and that might be an understatement, especially in the year especially in the year of 2021. But anyway, let's get into this. Both of these teams are top 25 teams. I would argue Tennessee's a true top 10 team. I think Clemson at number 7 is a little fraudulent. They haven't played anyone in ACC play. The two best teams they've played all year, South Carolina and Notre Dame, they lost to. So the two toughest teams they played, and those teams aren't even top 15 teams, Clemson lost to. They're able to beat mediocre opponents handily, and bad teams, they're able to blow them out. But any team with a pulse very much can compete with and beat Clemson. Tennessee, on the other hand, they're more battle-hardened. They've actually faced several good teams. They faced a handful of them. An example of that is Alabama, LSU, Pittsburgh, Georgia, Kentucky. I mean, all of those teams, including Florida, were actually ranked at the time Tennessee played them. All of those teams are bowl eligible. Alabama and Georgia got double-digit wins. South Carolina is an 8-win regular season team. Same with LSU, who's 9-4. They're actually a 9 regular season win team. And Pittsburgh's an 8 regular season win team as well. Tennessee's much more battle-tested. Technically, they're without more starters than Clemson is. Their wide receiver core, though I still think it is very deep, is hurting. And their starting quarterback in Hendon Hooker is out. But this game will take place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll air on ESPN. Tennessee's given a 57.4% chance to win, according to the Football Power Index. But the Football Power Index doesn't take into account the starting quarterback's health status. It doesn't take opt-outs into effect. This point spread does, and the Tigers are decisively favored, according to Vegas, by 6. And Clemson's also negative 235 on the money line. I think Tennessee with Tim Banks, Josh Heupel, and I know Alex Golesh was hired for a head coaching position. I do not know if he is staying with the team through the bowl game, but I think that Tennessee's offense, and with Josh Heupel, I think that they are in good hands regardless of that. Clemson's staff, on the other hand, Brandon Streeter as offensive coordinator has been nothing short of disaster, in my opinion. Just looking at how DJ Uiagalelei fared and how that offense at times fared, they are not a good team on offense, and their defense has taken a massive step back. Their defense has. Wes Goodwin and Mickey Kahn as a defensive coordinator duo. I don't know exactly what to think of them yet. They returned a decent chunk, and many thought that their D-line would be among one of the best in the country, but they have not lived up to that Brent Venables level of defense that we even saw just a year ago in 2021, as Clemson's defense is not even top 20 in scoring or in efficiency. They're a fringe top 25, maybe even worse level of defense. I'm going to give Tennessee the edge at staff here. Tennessee's O-line was up for the Joe Moore Award at some point. Both have allowed similar levels of sacks, but I will just say that Tennessee's played tougher competition there. They faced defensive lines like Georgia and even like Alabama's, where they faced Will Anderson and Jordan Battle. So Tennessee's offensive line is a lot more battle-tested. They have the presence to them where they can run the football and pass pro. Clemson's D-line, I'm just going to give really not just benefit of the doubt here, but from their play in 2021, the fact that they have, Tyler Davis, Brian Breesy, KJ Henry, Justin Maskell, they have guys up at the D-line, and, Clemson, despite their regression in defense has been the name of the game for the Tigers for the past few years as the offense has regressed and as Brent Venables remained a constant there for a long time up until the conclusion of the 2021 season. I also gives Clemson the edge at linebacker and especially at defensive back, where Tennessee has been very poor all throughout the year, especially in the later half of the season. Special teams, I'm going to give the edge to Tennessee. Tight end and running back on offense, I'm going to give the edge to Clemson. You have Will Shipley at running back for Clemson. Will Shipley is a guy that is impressive, certainly looks to one day play NFL football. For wide receiver, even with the opt-outs of Cedric Tillman and Jaylin Hyatt, I am going to give wide receiver to to Tennessee. You have Brew McCoy, you have Squirrel White, Ramel Keaton. You have, Brew McCoy especially being a highly talented recruit out of high school. He's seen action this year. I'm not impressed with Clemson's wide receivers, if I'm being honest with you. Joseph Ngata is their biggest name there by far. Everyone else is basically an unknown. And then we have finally quarterback. A lot of people like Cade Klubnik, but his best game, mind you, was against a team that frankly doesn't have a defense in UNC. Joe Milton, I as a Michigan fan have watched Joe Milton. He is statistically and by watching film, he is an improved player compared to last year and compared to when he was at Michigan in 2019 and 2020. He is in much better hands. Much better hands. He's passed for 720 yards, 7 touchdowns, and has an 85.7 QBR, so a similar QBR to Hendon Hooker. I am definitely giving him, just based on experience, height, weight, talent, supporting cast, I'm giving quarterback to Tennessee without batting an eye here. Clemson is 9th in ESPN's Football Power Index, and they're 14th overall in efficiency, compared to Tennessee being 5th in both categories. Tennessee, listen, these analytics, the downfall of them for these bowl games is they do not take into account of opt-outs. They don't. So these teams are much closer to each other because of those opt-outs than if they didn't have opt-outs. I think, let's be honest here, in my opinion, if Tennessee didn't have opt-outs and injuries, and neither did Clemson, I think it would be safe to say that Tennessee should and would win this game by double digits, and it wouldn't even be a question about it. But that's not how life works with opt-outs, NIL, the portal. It's basically playoffs or bust, with the exception of Alabama, which I'm going to talk about that and how that impacts their chances of beating Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl in another episode. Which, speaking of which, if you aren't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, comment your thoughts down below, and hit that notification bell. Clemson is the nation's 5th most talented team. They have a raw talent edge by far over Tennessee, and the Tigers' main strength is their running back, Will Shipley. It's their main strength. The Volunteers' main strength is their deep, wide receiver room. Will Shipley is a running back who has had he's had over 1,000 rushing yards this year, 15 rushing touchdowns, 5.8 yards per carry, nearly 200 rushing attempts. And for Tennessee, that wide receiver core, Brew McCoy, Ramel Keaton, Squirrel White, I guarantee you with how they've developed wide receivers at Tennessee, there are other names that I'm not even talking about who could come alive and perform extremely well in this Orange Bowl. I can guarantee you that for sure. This is going to be an exciting matchup. Clemson's ground game against Tennessee's air game. They have areas where they're depleted and faulty at both of their strengths. These are not elite teams in their current state. Tennessee, their offense, I'd argue, would be elite decisively, but they do have opt-outs, and your starting quarterback, who is a Heisman contender and who's top 3 or top 2 in QBR being out, really does hurt. That's for sure. But speaking of quarterback, and speaking of your starter being out or away from the program, I want to talk about the impact players. I think the impact players are the quarterbacks here. I think that watching how Clemson against UNC, which, I mean, the fact that they were struggling to score against UNC, period, amen, was pathetic. The only way UNC was going to win is if they themselves played perfectly on offense, and they couldn't. Drake May looked like J.J. McCarthy against Nebraska this season. That's not a compliment either. But the change they had once Klubnik came in and they just started blowing out UNC was obvious. He elevates that team. Cade Klubnik gives this team actual top 15, possibly top 10 potential. I don't think the supporting cast with Klubnik or the defense is good enough to, compete in the playoffs with Klubnik at quarterback. But he elevates them. He certainly does. He's only thrown for 377 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and he has a 68.6 QBR and a 146.2 passer rating. He also has 88 rushing yards for 4 yards per carry and 1 rushing touchdown and 1 reception of 19 yards. He got his first game of significant playing time against UNC. Every other game, he's thrown 5 passing attempts or less and has had 6 rushing attempts or less. Just seen very spare action. But he was brought completely in that championship game, and he excelled. And I don't know exactly what to expect of him in this game, but I do know that Tennessee's passing defense and their defense overall is not their strength. So Cade Klubnik certainly could have a big game here. He could certainly have, like he did against North Carolina, nearly 300 passing yards, a high completion rating, 1 or 2 or 3 touchdown passes, and he should have a few rushing yards as well, as Clemson's O-line is improved from last year, and Tennessee's front 7 isn't much to worry about. Joe Milton, on the other hand, is much more experienced. He's held down starting positions before at the University of Michigan. He's a senior, though he has 1 more year of eligibility. I think next year he will be a dark horse Heisman candidate, and it will, unlike his time at Michigan, be a legitimate Heisman contention. He's a senior, 6'5", 245 pounds. He's had 720 passing yards with 7 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, and an 85.7 QBR. He also has a 217.7 passer rating this season, and he has 72 rushing yards for 10.3 yards per attempt. No rushing touchdowns, though. And he started the Vanderbilt game where he barely completed 50% of his passes, had a 126.9 QBR, and had a passer rating. He had a 73 QBR. In other games, though, whether it's against South Carolina, Missouri, Tennessee Martin, Akron, or Ball State, mostly scrub opponents, but he has had big play capability. I don't know how he's going to fare up without, Tennessee's 2 best wide receivers, but he has, unlike all these other games, he's had a month to prepare for this game. He got his feet wet against Vanderbilt in the starting position. And Clemson's defense, they do have menacing players, but they're not the same menacing, intimidating defense that we've gotten used to when Clemson and when college football was spoiled with Brent Venables as a defensive coordinator. So we'll see what Joe Milton can do with the opt-outs of his team, but Tennessee's fortunate that he's been playing in garbage time for a while this season and that he got his feet wet as a starter against Vanderbilt. We'll see if Joe Milton has legitimately made improvements and taken steps forward, as this is going to be the best game, that the best opportunity for him to show that he has stepped up his game, as he is facing a good, above-average defense in the Orange Bowl, and he's doing it as a starter. This is his first time starting since early last season, and in none of the games he played as a starter last season or in 2020 when he played for Michigan did he face a team like this Clemson team. That's how weak of teams he's played since his first start at Michigan. But let's get on to the prediction. I'm picking Tennessee to win here and to cover. I'm thinking 38-30. I think Clemson's offense will move on this Tennessee defense, but I think that they're just not good enough of an offense to finish all the time in the red zone. I think they'll score touchdowns on half of their not possessions, but half of their scoring possessions, field goals on the other half. I look for Tennessee's offense to be much more consistent in punching the ball into the red zone. That's for sure. Tennessee will have their best season since 2001. They'll be 11-2. They'll possibly finish in the top 5 or top 4, depending on how the playoff teams and Alabama do in their bowl games. Clemson, once again, fall short. They will fall short in a big game. And Will Shipley, I think, will have a solid game. He'll have 100 or more rushing yards and 2 or more rushing touchdowns. Cade Klubnik will sputter in the red zone. A little bit of a bold prediction there, but I do believe that Tennessee, and this is statistically proven, their defense is more impressive than North Carolina's. A defense made of college football commentators and sportscasters could possibly perform better than North Carolina's starting defense. Their starting defense is just so inefficient, so bad. It's so embarrassing. And I think Cade Klubnik will have great moments, but he'll also have bad moments. In the end, he'll be inconsistent. There will be hope for him to be much better in 2023, but he's a true freshman. He's facing a defense that is below average, but they're better than most defenses he's played this year. And Tennessee, believe me, they are going to come out and they're going to be hungry because this is their first New Year's Six Bowl appearance in quite some time. Joe Milton, on the other hand, I think will have nearly 300 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. He will have a game. And he will show not that, he's one of the nation's best quarterbacks and he's just been waiting as a backup to an even better, more elite college quarterback, but he's going to show that he's peaking, that in his career he is on the rise, and that next year he can be a legitimate Heisman contender at quarterback under Josh Heupel's development. The Volunteers are the better team all around. They just are. They're higher ranked in power rankings. In theory, they have far less talent than Clemson, but let's be real, they do have the better coaching staff. They've been developed better all year long. They have the second most efficient offense, the 55th most efficient defense, the 13th most efficient special teams. Clemson, on the other hand, is the 31st most efficient offense, the 12th most efficient defense, the 59th most efficient special teams unit. Also, when you look at strength of record, Tennessee is 6, Clemson is 10. Tennessee is better in both game control and average in-game win probability than Clemson. Tennessee's more battle-tested. Tennessee, their margin of victory is wider. And Tennessee has overall the better skill position play, which modern college football, skill positions matter more than ever now. And at quarterback, and at wide receiver, and even at running back and tight end. I mean, I gave Clemson the edge at running back and tight end, but you have some guys. You have some guys for Tennessee there at those positions. You really do. At running back for Tennessee, you have Jaylin Wright, you have Jabari Small, you have Dalen Sampson, you have SEC tier running backs, and then you also have Princeton Fant and Jacob Warren at tight end. So you don't have Jalen Hyatt, you don't have Cedric Tillman, which is really unfortunate. And I think that Tennessee would win this game by 2 touchdowns, maybe even more, if those two and Hendon Hooker played in this game. But here we are. Tennessee has to deal with what every team that doesn't reach the playoffs has to deal with. Opt-outs. But I'm confident that Josh Heupel and his coaching staff will overcome that and beat Clemson and send Dabo Swinney back to the ACC. And that's all I have to say for this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts on this prediction down below, and if you're listening via Spotify, make sure to follow the channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.